Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to start our second day of the PsyTech Virtual Summit and very, very honored to introduce you to our panelists today. Firstly, I'd like to introduce you to Christian Angermayer, who doesn't really need an introduction. He is the CEO of ATAI Life Sciences, and he has set himself the ambitious goal to enable people to live healthier and happier lives. ATAI's focus is on developing solutions for more than 300 million people who suffer from depression, especially by bringing back formerly vilified drugs like psychedelics into the legal realm. We also have here today Philippi. She is the founder of the New Health Club, a lifestyle platform for mental wellness and the new use of psychedelics as a tool. The New Health Club is creating narratives around modern ideas of healing, and I know that I thoroughly enjoy all her podcasts. I'd like to welcome both of you today and thank you for joining us. I'm going to get straight into it. Christian, can you hear me?
I can hear you super well. Hopefully you can as well. You can see me, right? Yep. Good.
I can hear you great. So I'd just like to start with the first question to you. How did you, as a businessman, get into psychedelics in the first place?
Okay, first, one important thing, because you introduced me so nicely, but there was a tiny mistake. So I'm the founder of ATAI. No, don't worry, it's not a bad mistake. I'm the founder of ATAI, but I'm always jokingly saying, but it's actually the truth. I think I'm a good founder, but I'm not a good CEO, because I'm always all over the place and I do more things than one. So I need colleagues who do it with me, and I'm very proud that we have an amazing CEO who's Florian, I think, who you know as well. So Florian Brand is the CEO of ATAI, so he started ATAI with me, and Lars and some others. So so we do it together, and we have a very sort of split of responsibilities. So I love speaking, so this is why I'm always allowed to go on these panels. But Florian is doing the day-to-day job as a CEO, and he's doing that actually very well.
Sorry.
So how many? It's always like I try to make it short, because actually the only thing I forgot to ask you is how much time we have. But the short version is I was actually very not anti-drugs in terms of politically or whatever, but for myself I decided very early. I come from Bavaria, which is sort of the beer state of Germany. So beer is like our basic nutrition. But very early, with 13, when people start drinking, I decided for myself that I do not want to take anything which is considered a drug, legal, illegal. So I never actually drank alcohol ever, especially not beer. I never smoked a cigarette. I actually never smoked a joint yet. So I did nothing till 7 years ago. In the meantime, friends of mine set me up at the dinner with a very famous neuroscientist in Germany. He's really pretty famous, and they were like, okay, he was actually told from my friends, you could try and loosen Christian up a little bit so we could make him drunk for the first time when you tell him as a scientist that alcohol is not really bad for him. So we spoke about drugs and all of that, and meaning he actually honestly couldn't tell me that alcohol is not bad for somebody. So he pulled out this famous chart by David Nutt. David Nutt wrote this whole book about the misperception we have about drugs. And there is this one chart, everybody who's listening, you should Google it. It's my favorite chart in the world. If you Google David and then Nutt, N-U-T-T, and then chart, like the chart, it comes up right away, which shows you the risks illegal and legal drugs, all of them have. And surprisingly, for a lot of people, I'm spilling a little bit now the surprise. Surprisingly, alcohol has by far, if you look at the sort of comprehensive risks alcohol is posing for the body and for the mind, is the number one, actually before heroin, and the second worst drug. That doesn't make heroin any better, but the second worst drug, but after alcohol, is heroin. And then come 20 other drugs, and then comes these tiny risk for magic mushrooms, which is practically the risk is that you have an accident or whatever when you do it. So practically magic mushrooms don't pose any risk. So I was like, what's that? So he was like, well, there's psychedelics. That's his main thing. And he told me all about psychedelics, about magic mushrooms. And I got curious, but it took me then a year, and then I'm finished with the story. But I'm always wondering how people very quickly say, oh, yeah, I'm trying magic mushrooms. So it took me a year because I do a lot of biotech. as an investor, and this is also the sector in which I started my career as a founder. I read a lot about it, and what I've read about the medical potential and the upside of psychedelics, this was so compelling. So a year later, I actually decided to, or not decided, it was sort of maybe you would say destiny. I was in the Caribbean with good friends, and they said, "Oh, we have magic mushrooms," and I trust them. It was like homegrown magic mushrooms, so I knew what I'm getting, and I was like, you know what? Let's do it. And so it was the first drug I ever took, and in a short version, it was the single most meaningful thing I've ever done.
Wow, that's incredible. I really like that, because I'll make you a confession right now. I had my first trip during quarantine about 2 weeks ago.
Oh my God, you're coming late, and you organize a conference about psychedelics. Right. So, okay.
Okay, I'd like to hear from you, Anne, about your reason for getting into this amazingly exciting industry.
Can you hear me, actually?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay, good.
Yeah.
So I got into the industry because I was writing about Christian, actually. And so I got more and more interested in this. And it's really true. I stalked him a little bit on LinkedIn for a while. And like, I need to know about this a little bit. But
I can tell my side of the story in a second. It's fun.
Okay. So I actually, a year ago, I did a guided LSD trip, and in I think February, I did a psilocybin experience at Synthesis, and since then, I really decided that I wanted to be in that, I don't know, industry. And I mean, I came in it because of personal reasons, but it turned into a career choice, I would say, because I think it's really the most fascinating thing I experienced ever, I have to say. So this is how I got there.
Everyone's got a story of how they got there. But we all know that clinical research for psychedelics started decades ago. And it's only in the past couple of years that unbelievable interest has returned. So I'll start with you now, Anne. Why do you think that is? Why has it made a comeback now?
Well, I mean, of course, right now we're even in a more accelerated situation than before COVID. But I mean, I think now I would say is the right time, because I feel like in the last year, I increasingly met people who were actually, first of all, admitting that they had kind of mental health problems, or they wouldn't know really what to do. And I found it interesting that there was kind of really like a change in the last year where people suddenly started to open up with these things. Not necessarily they were all like clinically depressed, but you started to talk about things suddenly. And for some reason, I feel now is a time where it's really a lot of truth, I feel, comes out. And this also goes often for personal, I don't know, for the truth about your life. So people, I feel, are triggered to talk about things more in a more truthful way than ever before, I feel. And I think that's why this responds to the increased interest in psychedelics also.
Christian, what would you say?
What? Mute me. So first of all, meaning the sad reason is that that the number of people suffering from various forms of mental diseases is really growing every year. So, which is, by the way, an interesting and very little explored sort of phenomenon, because we would say mental health or mental illness is not an infectious disease. But it's, if you look at the chart of suicides, if you look at the charts, how opioid addiction patients, the number of opioid addiction patients developed over the last 10, 15 years, actually take any mental illness and you look at the chart, you would almost be tempted to say this is an infectious disease because it's growing, pretty rapidly, So first of all, as a fact, psychedelics see a renaissance because that's happening, and sort of people were remembering that we had actually these drugs in the medical world in the 50s and 60s, and for pure political reason, we were sort of shunning them. So it's mainly need driven, I think. And then if if I add, but that's a pure speculation, why we see so many mental health issues right now, then I would say the world we live in, because it's a little bit absurd. Like, forget about COVID, like, it's especially, by the way, COVID will make it so much worse. That's meaning, and that's a real tangible reason, but it already was growing before. Yeah, and actually my view, or sort of the scientific view, but nobody has really, like, it's not a lot of really scientific work about it, is that the world we live in is actually not good for our mind. Yeah, which is sort of counterintuitive, because, like, if you look at the Second World War and maybe the 2 decades after the Second World War, this was definitely a harder place to live in. So in any means, again, leave COVID out as a special event now, but in any means, I would say we as society and as humans, we're better off. Yeah, we have better healthcare. Yeah, more people are at work, whatever. But still, we seem to have sort of created a world which is very, very negative for our mind. Yeah.
We're not created it. What do you think needs to happen for these substances to get correctly integrated into the healthcare system, Christian?
Well, the most important thing, meaning what we believe, is that it becomes what it used to be, which is a medical drug, not a recreational drug. So we want to make various psychedelics legal again as a medical treatment, which is taken with a doctor or a therapist together in a sort of controlled environment. Yeah, and for that, yeah, you need to get it approved, like you do any drug, like any cancer drug, anything in America from the FDA. Yeah, and in Europe it's called EMA, European Medical Agency. So we going with our compounds, psilocybin, magic mushrooms, yeah, a new version of ketamine, ibogaine for against addiction. We going through very rigorous, very thorough drug approval processes, as you would do with any other drug. Because the good thing is that will once and for all prove, hopefully, that these drugs work, and give also the doctors sort of the guidance how to administer them.
That seems like a huge step on its own, that section. I mean, even once you get through the approval, how do you get the doctors to understand how to prescribe it, when to prescribe it, and for patients to even request it?
Well, first of all, the second one is actually the more interesting question. I would say the doctors, and we're speaking already to a lot of psychotherapists, I mean, it will be both, it will be doctors and psychotherapists, they are actually craving for a solution. I think if you are a doctor and you have sworn that you want to cure people, you know that all the tools you have at the moment, SSRIs, whatsoever, are not sufficient. So we have actually talked, especially interestingly, to older doctors who have been around maybe at the end of the 60s, and they are all like, look, we know these drugs work because we did use them legally, and these sort of very valuable treatments were taken away from us because of pure political reasons. So I think the whole medical community, I mean, I'm making generalistic statements now, but I think a lot of doctors and therapists are actually eagerly waiting because, again, first of all, because it's very frustrating if you're a doctor or therapist and sort of that you don't have the tools, and the tools are there, but you are not allowed to use them, and it's always very tricky for them. Yeah. So that's a point. So the second one is actually more interesting because that's always the point I also make. Even more so when people talk about shouldn't these drugs be broadly legal? Yeah. And then I think we all forget, meaning I see now there are 1,349 people, in the sort of conference, and we all have our hopefully positive sort of backstory with psychedelics, and we all are very convinced, but we are a tiny, tiny, tiny minority of people who sort of dare to do that, and if I talk to my parents, or friends or whatever, it's still very like, oh, I would never do that. I'm way too afraid. And I hope that by bringing it into the medical world and that they get it then offered from their doctor, we sort of bridge that gap that people might be afraid. Sort of in a spiritual way, they might be afraid of learning about themselves, because as Anne said earlier, yeah, this is what you do. You learn about yourself. You can always call it, you meet God, you meet yourself, you meet your soul, but you meet somebody or something, and it's always a learning process you're going through. And it might be that a lot of people say, hell no, I don't want to learn about myself. Give me an SSRI and just numb me down, yeah? So, but I think we sort of decrease that fear people definitely have if they can do it with a therapist together. Which, by the way, that's always one of my most important sort of points, which I personally believe in, is like, if you look in the history of these drugs, they were never party drugs. Yeah. So I really don't think they are party drugs, because this is not what they are. Meaning, if they are since thousands of years, yeah, they are used in religious ceremonies, but always in a situation where you had a shaman, a priest, yeah, whichever name you might give that person, a guide, yeah, who guided the patient or the disciple through the psychedelic trip. So these were extremely, in a very positive meaning, ritualized experiences. Yeah, and we trying sort of say to recreate that in our world, and in our world, we will be a therapist who has the sort of duty and ability of a shaman.
But I mean, the same. I mean, the emails we're getting is, I would say 90% people asking, I heard about this, where can I do this? Where do I have to go? So, and they're basically from all over the world. And it seems also from every age group. So you can't even say, well, it's that kind of people or these kind of people. So, but I mean, the request, I feel, is like, it's growing so fast, I feel, right now.
There is a certain desperation to make this happen for people, and hopefully it'll happen as soon as possible. But I want to ask you, Anne, I know for you, and we've discussed this before, that the language we use around psychedelics, around mental health, are significant for change, because people are uneducated, they don't know. What are your thoughts about it? Because I know you do have a lot of opinions about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the moment it's interesting. There's either like a very medical language or like a total like, well, let's do this. It's super fun, and you should go to Ibiza and some retreat and do some mushrooms. So that's kind of the two kind of opposites right now. And I found it interesting. There was just this Netflix documentary, and we had the director on the podcast who had done a documentary where he talked about celebrities, or with celebrities, about their trip. For example, Sting and Ben Stiller. And you realize that if people like, for example, Sting talk about doing LSD in a very different way than normally people hear about it, it's already something where people just pay attention to it more differently. Instead, that he would just say like, he would not say like, well, I just went out and we just had a great party. So he specifically said what actually did it to him and how it made him more creative and how it connected him to his band, basically. So, and I mean, our aim is a little bit to kind of create a new language, and that language around psychedelics, or to communicate psychedelics, is always based on science. That's super important. I realized that you don't come up with like, wow, I had this super crazy event thing going on. Don't do it. Just really come from a scientific point of view and talk to scientists, but maybe ask questions that not other scientists would ask these scientists. For example, tomorrow we have Robin Carter-Harris on the podcast, and I'm trying to exactly ask him questions that are not coming too much from a scientific standpoint, and so come up with a new kind of, let's say, more better language to communicate psychedelics. That's something we kind of really think a lot about actually at the moment.
Christian, did you want to add to that as well? Did you have thoughts?
I know I'm always all over the place. I'm reading some of the comments as well. So and I'm always happy, by the way. There is anything you can ask me. I'm very open-minded. So maybe two sort of answers or comment on a comment which I see on the at least my right side is like, the one is because somebody said I should not talk down SSRIs so quickly, which is true, by the way. So I didn't want to do it. I'm saying like, but they don't work for everybody. And by the way, even with psychedelics, I think nothing will work for everybody. So there is not the one pill fits all, meaning our body is already very complicated and our mind is even more complicated. And we just start sort of learning the basics, how our mind and our consciousness and everything works. So what we hope, and this is why we also develop more than one psychedelics. It's not just magic mushrooms. You have ketamine, you have ibogaine. Other people like MAPS is developing MDMA, which is really valuable. So I think, and this is again, but in a bigger context, this is why therapists are so important, because they know the patient, so they can analyze what's the issue. Yeah, they know the history. By the way, and then you can positively say little side effect with psychedelics. But also psychedelics might have side effects, and there might be contraindications where you shouldn't use psychedelics in general, or maybe this psychedelic or that psychedelic. So there has to be, and there will be, a doctor who can work with the patient and then pick sort of the one drug or the two drugs and sort of, try to help the patient. So it's not a one size fits all, and SSRIs will also play obviously a role in that, and so I don't want to brush them aside. And the second is, so yes, we're extremely on decriminalization was a question. So we're extremely focused on the medical use, because I think we all, again, as I said, we should all be very careful, because we all have so positive experiences, and we should not forget there are like more than 300 million people who suffer from depression, who maybe don't have the impetus to do psychedelics, maybe also don't have the money, because like, where do you get a guide if it's not in the medical system? We hope that once our drugs are approved, that they are also paid by the healthcare providers, hopefully as often as possible. So there are many people who will not be able to access psychedelics if not in the medical way. So this is why this is our priority, because our priority is really to helping those people. At the same time, because obviously, and I did it myself, I'm very much acknowledging positively the positive power these drugs can have also on healthy people. Nobody should go to jail for growing magic mushrooms or having them in the car, and that's decriminalization. The only thing I'm against is it shouldn't be sold as like beer everywhere, because they are way too mighty. And I think then it wouldn't help the people who really need it. And it wouldn't also be a service to sort of anybody, if they sort of lose a little bit of their sacred, spiritual, or guided touch. So that's my view. So the people who are sort of experienced themselves, it should be decriminalized. You should not be bothered. But for sort of the people who need it, it has to be the medical system.
About the profit model of your businesses. Most big pharma companies, everything hinges on affordable drugs that you're stuck taking for the rest of your life, like SSRIs that you're dependent on taking every day. So how do you make money off a medicine that's a single dose or just a few doses with therapy, and you may not need to continue? How does that become profitable?
I know that question comes always, and I really have to say, not just answer it for magic mushrooms, but for any drug, because I have a lot of normal biotech companies for cancer or whatever. I don't know any real biotech entrepreneur who's sort of not saying, I want to cure people. And everybody's goal, I know, who develops drugs for anything, is curing people with one treatment. So there is no conspiracy that biotech guys try to do treatments who just work if you take it every month, or whatever, in a recurring way. That's just not true. I've never found anybody who said, "Oh, I'm gonna be evil and I'm gonna sort of find the drug which helps a bit, but if you take it every week." It's actually the other way around. Sometimes drugs just work if you take them regularly, and you can't change that as a scientist, and sometimes they do work, and you are happy in general if you find something that helps, so, and you will make a lot of money, and I'm very open with that, because I think I want to make a lot of money, because a lot of people gave me a lot of money. We raised more than 150 million, and we're gonna raise hundreds of millions more, because every single drug, to approve it is hundreds of millions, So and the only way to get these amounts of money is to promise your investors that you give them more money back. So I want to make money, and sort of, unfortunately, the market is so big that And some of the drugs, by the way, you will maybe take even every year. So I personally think, but that's not a recommendation, that it's very healthy. Even if you're cured from depression, you might want to do a trip every year to refreshes. Again, that will be then more the doctor's choice. But the market is so big, that even, and I would be very, very happy if that's the case, with one psilocybin trip, we can cure people for good. We still will make enough money. Because by the way, how drug pricing works, you get always, not exactly, but one indication for how expensive a drug will be and how much the insurance pays you is how much you save them. So how much would be the alternative costs? And because all of these SSRIs and everything practically which is out there right now is not a cure, but has to be taken permanently, the costs are so high that we actually will have an easy way, so to say, to negotiate a good price with the insurance companies, because we, in any case, will save the healthcare system a lot of money. So long story short, I think at least certain psychedelics have curative potential, and I'm very happy about it, and it still will be a good business.
I mean, also, we have so much people like requesting also more and more specific, like what you said, like treatments with ibogaine, not only psilocybin anymore, or LSD. And for that reason, also, we teamed up with the New Health Club with Dr. Bronner's, and they sponsored a couple of episodes for the upcoming podcast, where every kind of treatment, for example, we have probably Deborah Kaye, the great, also to ATAI related lady who works with ibogaine, which I'm very excited about. And that's a super interesting concept she's presenting in terms of addiction treatment. And I mean, I know a lot of people who are really struggling with, you could say with addiction, even if it doesn't look like it. And for a lot of people, I think, for example, this will be something that is like so life-changing and so groundbreaking. So, but again, like the kind of diverse approach, or like a almost like customization of these compounds is just starting right now, and we get more and more very specific requests, which has changed even over this last 6 months, I have to say.
I really appreciate your direct answers, and especially about that it's not bad to make money. It's fine to make money and also to do good. And I wanted to ask you, how do we accelerate acceptance of psychedelic therapy as a potential treatment for mental wellness? Because I know everyone's doing their part with podcasts, we're doing our summit, but how do we really accelerate it?
Well, I feel the most important, I think just very quickly, that I feel the most important moment is always if the patient's coming in with the patient story, and then people could say, well, I would never do LSD, blah, 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 whatever. And then somebody says, well, it helped me to do so-and-so and to lose my depression. And then this is, in my experience, always the moment when people are like, okay, then I can actually look into this. So the patient story, I feel, is always very important.
Yeah, but I would say it's going really well. Yeah, so I think we shouldn't rush things too much, because I think sort of sometimes the acceptance in society, in the broad society, outside sort of the hardcore fans, so to say, is bigger if it's gradually growing and if you're not sort of pushing it too hard. And I think whoever hasn't read it, Michael Pollan's book was a gift, because he described it so well, and he was so sort of, this was such an easy to understand yet extremely legit scientific book, and this is a rare gift that somebody can write so well and it still reads like a novel or whatever. So I think that book was great. So I think it's moving very well forward.
I think both of you, and the more that people hear these 1,356 people go and speak to another 10 people and tell them what they've learned, you know, that's how it grows. And it makes me think of, you know, we also have our cannabis business, and my husband went to synagogue on New Year's Eve of the Jewish festivals, and the rabbi asked him, how do we get cannabis for my mother-in-law? So that's what you want it to happen. It becomes just normalizes it, and that's the aim. And I want to finish off, because we're running out of time, with just a final question, and that is, what barriers are we facing to get this to be normal? So who would like to start?
Christian?
Man, first of all, I really think it's going well. I'm an optimist, and I think we should be aware that actually the barriers are super low. So society is willing. We can have a chat like that. Yeah, I can talk about my mushroom experience, and the police is not knocking on my door. Yeah, Michael Pollan can write a book and say, I took all of these drugs, and go on mainstream TV and talk about it. Yeah, so it is going really well. So and the reason, again, the unfortunate reason is that because society, I think, has realized they need at least an additional solution for a very big problem. So I would say the other way around. The biggest barrier could be if people, again, I'm for decriminalization, knowing though that it puts sort of a lot of responsibility in people's hands. So because there are, for example, some states in the US, I think, who are about to be decriminalized. Yeah. And what I do not hope is that people treat these very powerful, very sacred drugs in a not responsible way. Yeah. Again, I'm personally against party use, because I think this is not what they made from God or whoever you believe who made these drugs. And because then things can go wrong. And the worst case would be that a bus driver on magic mushroom kills some school children. Yeah, you can always argue this happens under alcohol a lot of times, but unfortunately the media always seeking for the new, yeah, would demonize it, and we would fall back for years. Yeah, so whoever does it, I have full understanding for it, but please do it in a responsible way, which pay tribute to what these substances really are.
And Andrew, sign off?
Sorry, so you couldn't hear you.
Do you want to add to that before we sign off?
Yeah, well, I mean, this normality will also, I think, it's my impression, come through the even increased need now after COVID. I feel like even more people will be interested in this. And but I mean, it's kind of, it's what I think it's right what Christian says, because if you're too fast, it becomes kind of, a lot of people become really, the opposite happens. They become kind of defensive. Like, oh, I'm not going to do it if it's too easy and too, well, I just have to go somewhere and buy it or what. So it's not, I mean, in the beginning, I might have thought about this differently a little bit, but now I realize it's very, yeah, like I said, it's very important to create like a new language around this that is not too just like cool or like, oh, it's super cool, just do it. It's not such a good thing, I feel too.
I would like to thank both of you for sharing your knowledge, your insight, your personal stories. And I thank you for all the hard work both of you are doing and for joining us at PsyTech Summit today.
Thank you all for joining. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.